Dr. Christian Jarrett, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
I'm really pleased to have you, and it's so exciting that Zoom allows us to do this. With you're in the UK. It's 7 in the evening for you. It's 11 in the morning for me, and I just discovered that we have both celebrated Father's Day just yesterday. And so I wasn't sure if Father's Day was a thing in the UK, but turns out that it is, and on the very same day. So we're going to be discussing your book. Who do you? I screwed up the title here somewhere. That's interesting. Who do you want to be? Right? No, be who you want. I'm screwing up the reading of the title rather than the title. Be who you want, unlocking the science of personality change. And this isn't your first book. You kind of, you did take a doctoral degree in cognitive neuroscience, which is a really hot area these days. Yet I have the impression that your career has been more in what I would describe as a science writer. Is that right?
Yeah, I did a 6-month postdoc, and then I was out of academia. Yeah, that's right.
How come? What happened? So many people are, as I say, cognitive neuroscience is a great area these days, very hot, all kinds of things happening. And there you were. And now then you moved. What happened? Were you disillusioned with something about it, or what went on?
Yeah, the direction of my PhD, well, it became very narrow very quickly, and it became focused on studying eye movements. And another thing, which I didn't like, how narrow it had become. It seemed to have become so far removed from the kind of bigger questions that had motivated me originally. It's one of those things. It's hard to trace how eventually I ended up in that particular niche. The other thing I have to confess is the particular area I ended up in. It was very important to be able to code, do coding, and programming. To program the stimuli on the computer screen for participants to look at, and also you needed to be able to do computer programming to analyze the data. And I was very weak on maths. Was never my strong point. I didn't take maths at high school, so I struggled. I tried to teach myself a little bit the computer programming, and I was struggling, and I didn't enjoy it. So.
Wow.
Yeah, I was more, I remained far more interested in this, the bigger, deeper questions and ranging across all different topics. And of course, going into science writing and editing, that allowed me to do that more.
Yeah, so you really are an example of your book's title, Be Who You Want. And you figured out after a long course of study, this is not who I want to be.
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, to an extent. Yeah, there's some truth in that. Yeah.
And so what motivated this particular book? You've written about various subjects. What motivated this particular book at this particular time?
Well, my book before this one, I had gone very much back into kind of neuroscience, harder kind of brain science. So that was about brain myths. And that was in contrast to my kind of day job, which was at the British Psychological Society, writing about new psychology findings, including a lot of personality research. And over the years, I think so I've done a lot of writing for the public about psychology, and I suppose a lot of the time a question that kept cropping up really was, how much can we change deep down? Like, do these different psychological techniques and interventions and therapy and so on, do they really lead to lasting change, or is it more superficial?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I know that's been a question maybe one of the perennial questions, at least when I was in school, people were still asking that question. Maybe it's decided now. Does anybody really change? And when you look at your friends, sometimes you say, well, this person went to this workshop and they said they're totally everything, but then knowing them as I do, go, not so much.
Yeah, exactly. So I was very drawn to that. I often would end up coming back to that question when I was writing about psychology, and then deciding on what shall I write a book about next. I thought, why don't I try and tackle that question? And
Yeah.
I think I had a kind of a personal interest as well. I've never really liked personally being kind of labeled as a particular type,
Mm-hmm.
and then people assuming, oh, because you're an introvert, let's say, you won't want to do X or Y,
Right.
or maybe you won't even be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so I guess I sort of wanted personally to explore it from that perspective as well, on behalf of anyone who doesn't like being pigeonholed or boxed in by the assumptions people make about them.
Yeah. Well,
So,
you're a perfect guest, I think, for this show and for my audience, because I have the impression that a lot of the people who tune in to this show maybe
yeah.
also share some of those feelings. And it's neat that you were working at uh, you said the British Society of Psychology. What was the title of that?
Yeah,
So
so
that
it's
you were really in a place where you were being asked to write about what the latest things are in psychology and have an overview of the field.
yeah, I helped found it was called the Research Digest, and it started off as an email newsletter, and then I turned it into a blog, and it was one of those situations of being, right time, right place.
Yeah,
It
good for
was
you.
just when blogs were kind of taking off.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
great.
yeah, that happened with the BPS Research Digest, and it really took off, and it attracted a following around the world. And so, yeah, I was the editor of that blog, and I was also a journalist on the Psychologist magazine, which is also published by the British Psychological Society.
Yeah.
So
So I'm feeling a bit of kinship to you as I hear all of this, because uh, this podcast, Shrink Wrap Radio, is really broad. I try to cover the broad area of psychology rather than just psychotherapy, say, even though I was trained to be a psychotherapist, but like you, my interests are broader than that. And I also resist being pigeonholed. And I've always enjoyed surprising my audience by sometimes having guests that they definitely would not expect. And yeah, so that's good. The subtitle of your book is Unliking the Science of Personality Change. And I kind of I was a little nonplussed by that. I thought, is there a science? That's speaking to my naivete, because as I got into your book, there was a lot of, oh yeah, of course there is a science. And, but my naive response was, is there a science about this? Because there are all of these self-help books out there for people who, that promise all kinds of change, and often from a therapeutic or a coaching direction these days. And I was wondering, do you look at your book as a self-help book?
yes, I do. So I was a little uncomfortable.
Not to force you into a little
Yeah,
pigeonhole there.
yeah, I was a little uncomfortable with that early in the writing process, because I was more comfortable early on with making it more of a kind of a popular science book about
Yeah,
the science
yeah,
of personality change. But my publisher and my editor at the time, the publisher, very much were encouraging me to extrapolate the lessons, the practical
Yes.
lessons for
Uh-huh.
readers. And so in the
Okay.
end, it is, I think it is, it'd be ridiculous to pretend it's not. So it definitely
Yeah.
has a self-help component to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I have to say that's the
Yeah.
case too. And but not in a bad way. And it's all based on the scientific principles that you lay out. And also, uh, I was glad to see that you do a fair amount of personal sharing about your own changes and your determination, as you already told us, to not get stuck in a particular self definition, but to really be as open as you can be to new stuff. So, how would you describe the ideal reader for your book?
Well, I think anyone who, I suppose, is maybe feels frustrated in their goals or ambitions, feels held back maybe by their traits,
Mm-hmm.
their personality traits in some way. I mean, more broadly, anyone who's interested in what makes us who we are and whether we're capable of change. So
Yeah,
more broadly, anyone just who's interested.
yeah.
But specifically, if any listeners, I suppose, would like to change themselves in some way at quite a deep level, um, not because someone's told them they should or because they feel, culture, current society says they should, but more for themselves in the service of their own values and ambitions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, to dive right into the science part of it, and we may skip around a bit because this book. By the way, I want to congratulate you on. You do a fine job. The book is very authoritative, and at the same time, it's a good read. Clearly, you are a good writer, as you sensed yourself to be, and decided to let yourself go in this direction. And so, it's a book that I can recommend and feel really good about recommending. So, I
Oh,
congratulate you on that.
thank you very much.
And so to jump into the science part, and something that I sort of knew about, although not terribly deeply, is Big Five trait theory, and this is something I had heard of, and but you really bring it to life. So take us through that, if you will, because that's some of the science of personality change, right?
Yeah, that's really what I grounded the book in. Yeah, is the Big Five theory. And so obviously there are so many ways of describing our personality traits and our behavior. And over the decades, personality psychologists have really whittled it down and removed the redundancy. And they've come up with these five main traits, which are like trait dimensions. So we all score
Yeah.
on them somewhere. And so there's openness to experience, which is how willing you are, as the name suggests, to try out new things, how open you are to new ideas and perspectives and opinions. If you are like listening to opera and you like watching foreign language movies, you're probably a high scorer on that trait.
Uh-huh.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's conscientiousness, which is how orderly you are, how industrious, ambitious, self-disciplined. There is extroversion, introversion. So very similar to how we talk about that kind of thing in everyday talk. But in personality science, extroversion is also, as well as being about how sociable you are and chatty, it's a little bit more than that. It's also how sort of drawn you are to reward and positive emotion. It's how energetic and active you are and how willing to take risks as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great trait agreeableness, which is how warm and friendly you are, but also it has to do with how you see others. So it's whether you are, if you're more trusting, if you tend to see the best in other people, you will be a high scorer on agreeableness. And then there is neuroticism, or emotional instability. So if you worry a lot, if you're prone to negative emotions like shame and guilt, and your mood tends to go up and down a lot, and you tend to experience a lot of stress, then you're likely to be a high scorer in neuroticism.
Yeah, as I hear you go through these, of course, I identify with all of them. And it's hard to assess oneself, but my meter is going, and I, and I think from day to day, and depending upon who I'm with, that seems to make a big impact. Maybe it shouldn't. I have this little voice coming in my head. Oh, you should have a more solid personality than being, how extroverted, introverted I am depends a lot on who I'm with. And if I've noticed that if I'm with somebody who's really very extroverted and they're taking up a lot of the air in the room, so to speak, that I'm pretty retiring, and it really puts me in my intimidated and introverted corner. And on the other hand, if I'm talking to somebody who's really introverted and all, and I'm having to carry the conversation, I may just come out and feel and appear to be, just a very extroverted person. And I imagine that we're all like that to some degree, or more. It's kind of like, this could be in some ways it could be like a reading, a tarot reading, or a astrological reading. So these traits have come out of lots and lots and lots of paper and pencil tests, right?
Mainly, yeah, that's right. And there's a lot of statistics goes into it. Personality psychology actually has a lot of underlying it, or is a lot of statistics to do with factor analysis, and
factor analysis,
making sure that these 5 dimensions are truly, independent, and making sure they haven't missed any out. And so a lot of it's to do with not the number crunching. And I should say, some researchers believe the big 5 do not cover everything. They think we need the dark triad as well, which
I was going to ask you about that. The dark triad, that sounds like a comic book.
So that's narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Although some experts say those 3 can really be captured by one more dimension, the honesty, humility dimension. So it depends who you ask.
Yeah.
But definitely, I would say I would think most researchers agree there is a need, whether you cover it with one more dimension or 3, there's a sort of a need for one more to cover the darker side of humanity.
So this is really, as you point out, there's been a lot of energy that's gone into developing this with a variety of personality theorists over the years. It's interesting to me that one of my faves, Carl Jung, gets in there with introversion, extroversion, and that has been a durable kind of observation. Now, I think, I was reading through the book and making some notes, and then I wasn't sure, I didn't want to go back. I was trying to rely on my memory. Did you refer to something called social trait theory?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I was skeptical about that. Whether or not I was. That would be a good one, though.
Yeah.
That would be a good one.
Yeah, I might be wrong, but I don't think so. There is, unless I have just forgotten the name of it. I mean, there is another way of categorizing people, which relates to what you were just saying about how much we vary or not, depending on who we're with. I can't remember if that was called social trait theory, but this is the idea of that some of us are high self-monitors and some of us are low self-monitors.
Okay.
And the low self-monitors, they just kind of act the same regardless of the social context. Whereas the high self-monitors, they're always, they try to adapt their demeanor and behavior to fit who they're with.
That would be me. You know? That would be me. I'm high on that, high on agreeableness, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll skip, in a way, we'll skip to the self-help, because you've got a chapter or a section called 10 Actionable Steps to Change Your Personality. So why don't you take us through those so that anybody who's hoping to get some ideas for that.
Yeah, well, I end the whole book, with the, I've got them here actually. the 10 rules for personal reinvention. Is that at the end of the book? Yeah, the final chapter. Well, number one is successful change is more likely if it's for a larger purpose, is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, shall I go through them all?
And expand it a little bit. I mean, I guess, I mean, we know that, well, it's no surprise to hear that, right? That having a higher purpose, you think of Alcoholics Anonymous and other kinds of groups where that principle and religions in general, I think, are driven by that notion that a higher purpose. And my own observations about addiction are the dramatic changes sometimes have occurred among people who were addicted, who get in touch with that higher purpose. So I think that's a powerful driver. And so I guess you're suggesting that that's something that a person could consider, whether if they really want to change, how much weight do they want to, and thought do they want to, and self-exploration would they want to put into that?
Yeah, the research suggests what happens more often is that a person's passions or their goals and personal projects change first, and they drive personality change, rather than personality change occurring first and leading to different passions and pursuits and values. So I'm drawing here somewhat on the work of people like Brian Little. And that's right. So what it implies is, if you have ambitions to change your traits, you're more likely to be successful if that's a route towards something larger rather than an end in itself.
Yeah.
So it could be anything. I mean, it could be wanting to be a better father, or maybe you're an entrepreneur and you feel held back by your reticence and introversion, and whatever it might be. I think you're more likely to succeed if it's for a larger purpose rather than for its own sake, or or to just fit in better or something like that.
Yeah. In terms of your own personality, what I remember from the sharing that you did was that you were kind of pigeonholed by many people as being introverted, and yet you find that you have, in fact, done some pretty extroverted seeming things like public speaking, and discovering that you're good at it and that you're entertaining, which is a great thing to discover. So.
Well, I something I realized, like on my own, reflecting on myself, was how I'd kind of been, I felt really quite different at different stages of my life. So I felt quite outgoing and extroverted when I was first at university, I had a large group of friends. I was going out most nights of the week, socializing and having a whale of a time. And then, I don't know, let's fast forward, let's say 10 years to more like my mid-20s, late 20s, I should say. I was living with my wife-to-be then in rural Yorkshire. I didn't have a car. I was doing my editing job. Hardly saw anyone. I did become extremely introverted. And I think what I realized then later on was, to actually excel as a science writer, you do need to do quite a lot of public engagement for a start. So there's that, practical reason for wanting to try and get out of your shell, in my case. But also I was inspired as well by these research findings that showed that even when introverted people are encouraged to act more extroverted, they enjoy it far more than they think they will. Yeah. And I think just being honest about myself, I think I probably do have, introvert leanings, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. But I think if that then interacts with your life circumstances, as it did with me in my late 20s, I think I was becoming rather isolated, potentially interfering with my career progression as I became more, more risk averse and, more withdrawn. And it just took that mixture of some ambition, my career ambition, plus that insight that I got from reading about those research studies to make me want to do something about it and get out of my shell a little bit. I mean, I'm not talking about some absolute radical transformation. I'm never going to be, and I wouldn't particularly want to be, one of those particularly high energy, buzzing people who needs to be surrounded by other people all the time and what have you. But I made an effort in my own life, for example, because I realized my job is very, very solitary by its nature. And I joined a local sports club. Rather than going to the gym by myself, which is what I used to do, so although there are other people there, you put on your headphones and you're just lifting the weights by yourself, you may as well be on your own. So I made myself start going to classes, where you're kind of forced to socialize. I especially did a boxing class where you would be put in pairs, so you had a partner, so you kind of you have to kind of chat and socialize. And it was uncomfortable at first because I had become, I think, particularly used to not having much social contact. But it's uncomfortable at first, but it's very rewarding in the end. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about is, you don't have to, for it to be beneficial, it doesn't have to be some kind of totally radical transformation. But I think you can tweak your traits by changing your habits and your lifestyle. And if there's some overarching reason or goal, drive the change as well.
So what is, I think we did number one on the list.
Yeah.
What's number two?
Number two is you won't improve unless you appraise yourself honestly.
Okay. Yes.
So I think this might apply to some people more than others, maybe, and it might apply to some aspects of personality more than others. The whole introversion, extroversion is quite obvious. I think that's more visible and easy to detect. But maybe when it comes to traits like agreeability, or even conscientiousness, things like that, it's maybe, I can imagine people maybe not wanting to face up to the need to change or the benefits
maybe not everybody wants to change, and you kind of I think one of the messages that comes through in the book is that not that you have to want to change, but if you do want to change, you're going to need to step out of your comfort zone. That you should kind of take chances and put yourself in some situations, as you have done, where that might have felt a little a little awkward at first. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's worth, I think one thing I was tapping into with the second rule is it's probably worth asking the people, like loving critics is one term for it, the people around you who you trust and have your best interests at heart. Ask them to kind of appraise for an honest appraisal as well, rather than just scoring yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I remember a friend of mine, I was involved in market research as another career. And one of my market research friends invited her friends who knew her well to come and have a kind of workshop experience where she had the board with large sheets of paper on it and getting input and so on, and getting people's perceptions and brainstorming ideas, given that she, that they have observed these things about her, and then brainstorming ideas about where she might go with all of this. I thought that was a really brave thing for her to do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, rather than make you go through the whole list of 10, we'll just leave it with, well, are there any more that you want to touch on that you really resonate to and think would enliven our conversation?
Well, maybe I think you just hinted at it, but the third one is real change begins with action, and maybe that's the important, most in some ways, it's a very important one. It's there's actually research suggests having desires to change, but not doing anything about it, or not having any specific plans for how you're going to go about achieving that change, can actually be counterproductive. So I think if anyone is serious about changing their underlying traits, you got to be realistic. And if you keep everything the same around you, if you keep the same routine, the same habits, the same company around you, do the same job, live in the same place, wishing that you would be different, it's not going to happen. I think it is worth being a little bit, realistic. How much disruption and discomfort are you willing to undergo if you're serious about achieving meaningful change?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at the chapter titles, and the first chapter is the we within you. And so what just that title evokes for me is the sense of multiplicity inside. Is that what you're getting at? That we're not just one thing? Or what does that mean, the we? Who's the we within us?
I think it kind of had multiple meanings, but one of them, I think it was an allusion to the different traits. I think partly.
Okay.
Yeah. I think for that chapter, that was the main reference there. But there's probably a more important meaning in a way, which is that we all do act differently in different situations and with different people, as you were mentioning before, and personality plays out over the long term, so it's the average in our tendencies across the long term. But it's probably important to remember that we all act in these different ways at different times. So even for example, the strongest introvert will probably act extroverted sometimes. Maybe when they're with their best buddy or something like that. So one way to think about personality is almost as a distribution profile of different behaviors. And so in that way, you can think of there being a we within you. You've got your agreeable side and your disagreeable side. If you're a high scorer in agreeableness, you're more often at the agreeable end, but of course there will be times when you're disagreeable too, for example.
I'm thinking of psychotherapy systems that assume that there are multiple personalities within us that we've internalized, which could be the critical parent. I'm thinking of a system called I think it's called internal family system therapy. I think I've got that right.
Yeah, that's right.
That's really based on that notion, and and other approaches have talked about subpersonalities and so on. So I think that's an interesting crosshatch with the stuff that you've covered.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it relates to. I think that's related to schema therapy, and it all ties into this idea, which I do touch on in my book, although not in that terminology of. Part of successful change is about obviously changing your self-concept, and bringing to the fore these. If you do have a different identity within you, like trying to bring that to the fore. The one that you is your more ideal sense of self or self-concept.
Yeah, I think in the therapeutic perspective, there's an idea of it's not either or, but learning to integrate, to accept all the diversity within oneself, and the parts of oneself that one is labeled as bad, and that we've worked to reject, and that often that part is very important to bring in to be our truest and fullest self. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and then discovered that it was in the book really in abundance, was my question was, any famous examples of personality change for the better? And I think you had some really great examples. Do any come to mind from the book? I know after I've written something, it's out of my head on the page and gone.
Yeah, I can think of some. There's a woman called Catra Corbett who I write about in the book. I read her memoir. So one thing I did is, as well as covering the research literature, I wanted to find some real life examples. So and to that end, I read a few memoirs. And Catra Corbett was, I think. By any stretch, she had a difficult youth. She was like a petty drug dealer, dropped out of school. And she, later on in her 20s, I think it was, she spent a night in jail, and it really shook her up. And it's almost, I don't know, a magical transition, but she, one day, partly inspired by the memory of her father who had encouraged her to be athletic, she went for a run around the block. and from that point on, she fell in love with running, and this became her, as we were talking about before, these overarching passions or personal projects in life. And for her, running became that. And she is one of the world's greatest ultra runners. She's one of only a handful of people who have run 100 miles more than 100 times, in one go. She's an inspirational figure, and one way I interpret her story is that she successfully, she obviously had very high extroversion. She was so drawn to risk taking and the buzz and the thrill of drug taking and raves and all that kind of thing. And she's channeled that passion and energy into running, and she's managed to combine it with increasing her conscientiousness, for which running gave her the kind of scaffold to do that. Because of course, any pursuit like running, it's one good thing about something like that is you get such concrete feedback on your progress as you improve your times and performance. Right. And something else she did, which I noticed in quite a few of the stories I covered, was education, and self-education often seems to be a really powerful factor as well. So she took herself back to school, as an adult, and retook her exams and got the qualifications that she missed when she was younger.
Yeah.
And that's a recurring theme in these stories as well.
Yeah. One that comes to mind is that a film that we watched last night as a family thing. I've got uh, uh, one of my sons is really into popular culture, and granddaughters who are really into their dreams for the future, as they're sort of early teens at this point, involve maybe being on the stage, maybe being a performer, singer, something like that. So we watched this documentary about Pink, and I didn't know that much about Pink, but she was a gymnast as a kid, and she's worked this gymnast stuff into incredible stunts in huge stadiums. And she was also, I think she was one of those who felt bullied early in school and had a very low self-esteem, low self-image, and has just created this sort of larger than life persona in in the process of transcending all of that. So I highly recommend that. You can find it on YouTube, anybody who's interested. And we watched it on Amazon Prime, actually. And she's got a little daughter who seems to be following in her footsteps as well. And you mentioned Nelson Mandela in your book. That's one that I remembered, which was an amazing trajectory that I think everybody's heard of. You've got a chapter called The Slings and Arrows. And what was the key idea behind that chapter?
Well, that was looking at, so although I build up in the book to this idea that we can choose to change and explore that, ways to do that, this Slings and Arrows chapter is recognizing and explaining the ways that life changes us. So inevitably, there are certain changes that occur as we age.
Yeah.
And then there are personality changes associated with many major life events, like getting your first job tends to be associated with a boost in conscientiousness, for example, divorce, and unemployment, bereavement, ill health, these kind of things. So that's what
So some of them are negative, like the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
It's another possibility. But you mentioned adolescence and marriage, and both of those are. I mean, adolescence is all about rapid bodily change, and there are personality changes that come along with that.
Yeah, I think the most intense period of personality change that you find through the life course is during adolescence.
Yeah,
that's when you see people's personality profiles changing the fastest, and some of the I think early in adolescence there are signs of a kind of regression, which many parents I'm sure will relate to. So things like conscientiousness tend to drop down temporarily before recovering again later in adolescence, for example.
Oh yeah. Like our kids, we have 4 kids, and they were, couldn't get them to do anything as adolescents in terms of helping out around the house, having chores, regular chores, etc. They all have gone on to just be super conscientious adults. And you go, whoa, where did that come from?
Well, that's reassuring to hear, I'm sure, for many people. And, an interesting finding there, I think, is, obviously parents, for understandable reasons, want to be able to help shape their kids' personalities in beneficial ways. But a lot of the research suggests actually parents, this is excluding, the extremes of neglect and that kind of thing. But in a normal supportive family home, parents' influence is relatively modest, the research suggests. And it's actually our children's friendships outside their home and their peer groups.
To the parents' despair often. I mean, peer culture, just particularly the way it's amped up in popular culture, right? Through social networking and so on. Uh, it, as a parent and now as a grandparent, it's hard not to despair. We hope that our good influence hangs in there to some degree, because there are just lots of ways that people can go astray, both for good, for better, and for worse. I mean, young people are looking for inspiration in their friends and for good examples, people that they admire and that they want to live up to and want to please. So it can be very positive.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be for good or bad, I think. But it's definitely, that's definitely a key sort of pivotal moment in life, is those adolescent years in terms of shaping our traits. And and the friendship groups we get into at that time. So because studies have looked at how much we're influenced, our personalities are influenced by our friends through life, and later in life our friends have much less influence, but in adolescence it's much more significant. So that is a way.
I think marriage is a powerful thing, maybe in terms of knocking off some of the burrs. It kind of that's how I experienced it. Some of the rough spots get sanded down and smoothed out in the process of learning to compromise and adjust to another person in your life.
Yeah, that reminds, there was a study I think I mentioned in the book that looked at those changes, like willingness to forgive. I remember that being a measure, and that increased after marriage. You're right. It's almost a crash course in needing to be understanding and having empathy, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. You've got a chapter on diets, highs, and hangovers, and certainly I didn't have a chance to really dig into that one. So give us a sense of it. But certainly diet is all about I'm not happy with my body and I want to change it.
Yeah. So this chapter
was about that. Is that why how did diets get in there?
That's to do with things like hunger. So it might sound daft in a way, how like, what could that have to do with personality? But imagine a person has a routine where they, and I mean, I certainly know people who get into these habits. They deliberately skip breakfast, for example, as a way to try and control their weight, and so they're hungry for most of the morning. Well, there's very reliable evidence shows. Have you heard of the idea of getting hangry? Angry when you're hungry.
I have not heard of that, but I can relate to that. I get a very bad personality when if I don't, particularly with dinner. If dinner doesn't happen, something goes on inside my body.
Yeah, well, there are some surprising studies, even have shown judges' decisions in court vary. How punitive they are varies according to the time of day, because of how hungry they like you to be.
Wow.
If you imagine someone has a particular lifestyle routine where this is something they build into their lifestyle, that they're hungry for a lot of the time, then that's the argument I'm making there, and that can actually contribute over time to affect how your traits manifest. Because if you spend a good part of every day bad-tempered because you're hungry, it's the diet in the title of that chapter, I think, is a reference as well to things like caffeine. So for people who are prone to worry and anxiety, so they're high scorers on neuroticism, again, they might have a routine where they have several, 2 or 3 cups of coffee every morning, strong coffee. they don't really give it much thought. It's just it's part of the, it's a habit. And for people who are prone to anxiety, that is known to contribute and escalate their anxiety. So again, you're not doing yourself any favors if you're a high scorer in neuroticism.
Well, there's just so much in this book that for people to discover. So again, I want to encourage them to do that. As you look forward, at this point in your life, have already gone through a bunch of changes. Are you planning some changes? What are you moving towards, and what do you envision along those lines for yourself?
Well, on the whole introversion extroversion thing, I have to admit my efforts had been affected by the pandemic. So I was really pleased with the changes I had managed to enact. I had a lot more social interacting, and I was in a good place. And then of course we have these lockdowns.
Yeah.
And whoever could have seen that coming. So I'm still I'm still trying to discover how to get back to what I had achieved. Because I mentioned that sports club I joined. Well, it for most of last year it was closed. So
right.
So that's an ongoing challenge. Yeah, as my job, I'm an editor. That's my day job, so that's an ongoing challenge for me, how to sort of bring enough social interaction into my life outside of the family. And well, personally, I would say I'm a high scorer in neuroticism, so that's an ongoing battle for me. I think conscientiousness, I feel like I've done a good job with that one, but I would advise other people who have leanings towards high neuroticism, be careful that by getting overly focused on conscientiousness, you don't trip your neuroticism levels up at the same time. You can become too obsessive about these things. So
right.
It's worth every now and again. It's one of my 10 rules is to keep a check on how things are going. I think that's important, every now and again, step back and take a breath and just make sure you're not doing more harm than good, for example.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down here, is there anything that you'd like to say that you haven't had a chance to say about your book?
Not really. I just, to anyone who wonders whether they can achieve lasting change, I would like to encourage them that they can. That's the mix of research that I uncovered and the stories that I found, the real life stories. I took inspiration from them myself, and it's not easy. And and like I said, you need to keep an eye on things, that it's going well and adapts all the time. But I hope the book sends a positive message. That's what I wanted. So
yes. Well, Dr. Christian Jarrett, I really want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Oh, thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.